I'm very pleased to be introducing our next speaker, the one and only Mayor Vincent C. Gray, who, yes, a big round of applause, who I know this month, Fair Housing Month, Language Access Month, town hall meetings, I've seen him day and night at events because we're both there sometimes, and I don't know how he does it from 8 a.m. until 9 p.m. So truly a mayor that works hard for us. We're fortunate to have him speak with us today. He's someone who is consistently supported and engaged in the issue of fair housing in the district. First, as an advocate for people with disabilities, then as an executive director of an organization dedicated to serving homeless and at-risk youth, later as a representative of Ward 7 and on the City Council, and now as the leader of the District of Columbia. He is a man who has prioritized social justice issues during his administration and has embraced the non-discrimination work of the DC Office of Human Rights. He has dedicated himself to creating truly one city, a city that embraces all its residents, in addition to all its neighborhoods, which he has proven in his tireless visits to work in all 8 wards. Issues of equality are dear to this man's heart, and for that and other reasons, I have tremendous amount of respect for our mayor. Now I'm proud to introduce to you and invite to the podium Mayor Vincent C. Gray.
Thank you very much, Monica, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be working with Monica Palacio and the work that she's doing at the Office of Human Rights. And I think we all know that before taking on this responsibility, she had the responsibility for the Language Access Act, and we just concluded the 10th anniversary of the Language Access Act within recent weeks. We've had a number of celebrations. I think I've been to 3 celebrations on this. And, you talk about fair access or fair treatment. That is probably one of the greatest examples of that, because imagine how isolated you feel when there are people are speaking in ways that you just simply don't understand. We've all had that experience, right, where you've been in a situation where you didn't understand the language that was being spoken, and there's a little bit of paranoia in you too, and you wonder if they're talking about me. I want to also welcome our director of the Department of Housing and Community Development, who is here this afternoon, a man who's spent a lifetime working on housing issues and some of the most challenging housing issues that one can possibly confront, and we are dealing with some of those now, and I'll just touch upon a few of those as we go through this presentation. First of all, in addition to thanking the Office of Human Rights, I want to thank the Equal Rights Center, I want to thank DHCD, and I want to thank the Developmental Disabilities Council, with which I've had contact, interaction, was a member at one point of the DD Council a number of years ago. It's a very important entity in helping to preserve the rights of people with developmental disabilities in the District of Columbia. There's no question that fair housing is one of the most critical issues that we face in order to be able to preserve an economically inclusive city. Much of my work over my life, and I appreciate the very nice introduction to Monica, but much of my work has been spent in trying to ensure that people have the opportunity, people with disabilities especially, have the opportunity to be able to live in our communities. When I started, which was now a number of years ago, I was involved in an advocacy effort to address an institution called Forest Haven. I don't know how many of you even remember it at this stage, but it's been closed for 20 years. And the goal was to try to liberate people who were, I won't say incarcerated, but in fact they were committed there to a life of substandard living, and really has some of the most fundamental abuses of their right to housing that one can imagine. When we started that journey, there were 1,300 people who were living at Forest Haven. It was a place in Laurel, Maryland, kind of off the beaten path, out off of 198. It was out there among those D.C. institutions at the time. How many of you remember Oak Hill? Oak Hill was out there. Cedar Knoll was out there. There was a place called Maple Glen. It was like an institution city that was located out there. Some of them were very young kids who were out there, and many of them were people with some of the most severe disabilities imaginable, because the city, and we weren't alone, this city, like so many others, had not come to the position that said that people deserved a right. They had a right to be able to live in an inclusive environment. And so we fought, and we fought hard to get people out of there. And when we started the exodus, if you will, the rhetoric changed from, people, need to be in a protected place, to they need to, some of these people can leave, but others can't. And I asked the question, I said, well, why is it that some people need to be here and some don't need to be here? And the answer was, because some of the folks who are here have such profound health needs that they need to be in a place like this. I said, so you're telling me that if somebody has profound health needs, you think those health needs can best be met in a place like this, where some of the most squalid conditions imaginable, some of the most, profound abuses of people's rights? I said, frankly, if I were going to address this on the basis of health needs and human needs, I would do that in the District of Columbia. Why would I do that in an isolated place like Laurel, Maryland? And eventually, it took 13 years to get to a point where the issue had turned around. It took litigation, it took legislation, and it took compelling the rights of the people who were there. And it's probably one of the most significant, if you will, fair housing cases that ever has existed in the District of Columbia. I was actually involved. The Fair Housing Act was amended by the Fair Housing Amendment Act, which I guess makes sense the name of it. But it was amended to be able to recognize at the federal level the rights of people with disabilities. One of the things that we did in this city that was hugely important is that group homes, because group homes was one of the techniques of moving people out of the institution at the time, were essentially discriminated against. Because we had a zoning, how many of you all are familiar with the zoning decision of family, the definition of family, what the definition of family is? It is any number of people who are related, living together, or 6 unrelated people living together. But the District of Columbia had crafted this zoning scheme that said that if you had, more than 5 people who were living together, you had to be subjected to spacing requirements. That these homes could be no more than 1 per square, and there could be no more than, certain instances, no more than 1 every 500 radial feet, or up to 1,000 radial feet, depending upon the zoning for the area that you were in the city. And the thing that never seemed right to me was, if you are a family, if you meet the definition of family, then why would you be subjected to these definitions? Isn't that a violation of housing rights, fair housing rights in the District of Columbia? And ultimately, the law was changed to accommodate that, so that whether you were a quote-unquote group home or not, you still had the right, if you were 6 unrelated people or fewer, to live together without any restrictions whatsoever. And that law still exists in the District of Columbia today. One of the things that we ought to feel good about, in my opinion, is the D.C. Human Rights Act. It is one of the most progressive and wide-ranging laws. We cover lots of categories. We cover all 7, by the way, of the categories of the Federal Fair Housing Act. That includes disability, it includes race, color, religion, national origin, sex or gender, and family status. But we've gone beyond that with the D.C. Human Rights Act of 1977, which has from time to time been amended. We have 18 of the 19 categories in the D.C. Human Rights Act that are covered for housing purposes. And that includes things like personal appearance, sexual orientation, family responsibilities, source of income, and whether there's domestic violence that may be involved, and of course, gender identity or expression. One of the things that I've been proud to do a lot of work on over the last couple of years is around trying to compel the rights of people who are transgender. Shouldn't people who are transgender have the same rights as everybody else in the District of Columbia? We've tried to create We've created work programs and gotten people to jobs. As a matter of fact, one of the things I'm most proud of is that, you know who one of the first employers was to step up and say, we will make sure that we offer people who are transgender a job? It was the District of Columbia government. Because there's no way we can talk the talk if we're not prepared to walk the talk. And that is precisely what we have done. I think in so many ways we've done more than virtually any jurisdiction, at least that we've looked at, to compel the rights around fair housing in the District of Columbia. And we need to do that. We need to continue to do that because we have such a wide diversity of demographics that we are required to do more as a result. The Equal Rights Center, which I think is one of our co-sponsors of the conference today, from 2011 to 2013 conducted a telephone test in all 4 quadrants of the city. And what they found, and you may already know this, is that 28% of the time housing voucher holders were subjected to some kind of discriminatory treatment. And that's because what? Because if I have a voucher that you draw certain conclusions about who I am, how I live my life, and what may be my economic status as a result of that. There were instances where landlords had outright refused to accept a voucher. And then there were instances where there were different standards or conditions that had been set up in order to treat people differently who had a voucher. And that's where compelling the rights of people who are looking for housing in the District of Columbia is so important. From 2011 to 2012, the center also conducted a number of telephone tests around the metropolitan area. And they discovered that people who had hearing impairments were being discriminated against. And Derek, I'm sure you probably are familiar with that as well. People who were able to communicate by using telephone relay services were vulnerable to increased application requirements for rent. They were required to make higher or additional deposits, fees, and receive less follow-up than some of the other applicants in the District of Columbia. I say all that to say the following, that these are clear violations of the law. It isn't, frankly, so much that we don't have the laws that are available to us. What we need to figure out is what more we need to do to ensure effective enforcement. We right now are we are challenged, and we're working hard on something, and that is we have a number of homeless families in the District of Columbia, and we're working hard to get people out of places like DC General, get people out of motels. We had at the peak during the winter, we had over 700, we had almost 800 families who were housed in DC General and hotels and motels in the District of Columbia and around the metropolitan area. Once hypothermia season was over, we made a commitment then that we were going to create a more dignified experience for the people who have been in those circumstances. And we've created a program called 500 Families in 100 Days. And the purpose is to try to get 500 families into apartment units by the end of June, within 100 days. Now, that sounds like a really humane thing to do, except that I don't have any doubt that we're going to face discrimination along the way, because there are people who have certain preconceived notions about folks who are homeless, and will come up with all kinds of reasons why they should not rent an apartment to them. So far, we're off to a pretty good start, but there's so much more to do. We have over 200 units that now have been identified. They're going through an inspection process, and at the end of that inspection process, they will be certified, hopefully certified, for habitability by the families that we're trying to move. What is the district's role in this? The district is putting up through our rapid rehousing program. We are committed at the very outset to up to 4 months of rent, and then we can pay another 4 months of rent if people are following their plan, and then another 4 months of rent on top of that if people are continuing to work towards being able to not need that kind of support again in the future. We also have asked, which is where, making sure people's rights are being observed, we also have asked that our faith community step up. We've asked mosques, we've asked synagogues, and we've asked churches in the District of Columbia to take on one family, one congregation, one family. And the purpose of that is to make sure that people understand their rights. For those who don't know, in terms of our homeless families, almost 50% of them are headed by someone who is 24 years of age or younger. Many of them have never headed a family before or had the financial management responsibilities that are associated with that. And as a result, they get overwhelmed. And if we don't put that kind of support in place, there's absolutely no chance that some of these families are going to make it. It isn't necessarily just an issue of whether the rent gets paid or not. It becomes an issue of you got 2 or 3 children. Somebody has to make sure that the family's resources are managed. Everybody know what SNAP is? Everybody know what food stamps are? That's what we call food stamps now. We call them SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which I guess is a nice acronym. But helping them manage their food stamp resources, their TANF check that comes in on a monthly basis, their health care benefits that they get typically through Medicaid, and then to be able to manage the responsibilities of a household on a day-in and day-out basis. And you think about that. 24 years of age at the top, we're talking about people in some instances who are 19, 20, 21 years of age. That isn't just about being homeless. We got folks who graduated from college who are going back home at this stage because it's more comfortable for them than going out on their own. So if we don't provide this kind of support, we're going to wind up with homeless families continuing to be homeless, and we're going to wind up with various forms of housing discrimination being manifested here in the District of Columbia. Our city is at a crossroads. We are in a very challenging place at this stage. Our population has grown rapidly. Over the last 2-3 years, we've been adding somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 people a month in the District of Columbia. Our population is now 647,000 people living in this city. And what's happening is our city, but for continuing intervention, will become increasingly unaffordable. It's happened in other places because people want to be there. It's happened in New York City. It's happened in San Francisco. And it's happening in other big cities at this stage. And so one of the things that we are doing is to try to invest in a way to keep our city increasingly a place where people can afford to live. That's why we've invested so much money into affordable housing. Michael, $187 million this year, $187 million that those dollars have been invested in 47 different projects, I think, that are either preserving or creating more affordable housing in the District of Columbia. And for this year's budget, we have proposed to invest $100 million in affordable housing. That would give us $287 million to be able to ensure that people have an affordable place to live in the District of Columbia. But I think we all know that a lot of times it is not about affordability, even though that is a huge challenge. It's also about ensuring that diversity is respected, that accessibility is respected, that ADA laws are respected and enforced where we see violations of those laws. So if you look at the National Fair Housing Alliance, and by the way, we have now created, I think, or have in the pipeline, 5,700 units of housing. And we're on our way towards not just 10,000, because that was what our goal was. We could probably reach, with the dollars we have now, we can probably reach 12,000 units of affordable housing. But don't we also want geographic diversity? You know, one of the most flawed concepts historically to me was the concept of how public housing was executed. I don't know, 7 or 8 decades ago, it became the policy of this nation. And we created these enclaves, you know, where people were placed. It was supposed to be, I think, right, Michael, it was supposed to be for a limited time as people got themselves to a different point. And we see what's happened with so many housing developments around the nation, here in our city. They became everything but. They became, you know, centers of social pathology. The money was not invested in keeping the housing upgraded, and there really was little or no effort to try to get people on to something else. So what we're looking for is to be able to make these investments, but to create integrated housing for people in the District of Columbia. When I say integrated, I don't just mean racially or ethnically. I mean economically integrated housing as well, and that is very difficult to do. You know, right around the corner we have a new development called City Center. How many of you are familiar with City Center? That is an economically integrated development, and I'm, you know, pretty proud, and I hope that it stays that way. But we have, you know, condos that are being sold in there for as much as $1 or $2 million. But yet we also have rental units in there that are for like, you know, as cheaply as 60% of the average median income, which means the household income, right, Michael, can't be over about $60,000 for a family that would qualify. That's what I mean by economic integration, and it's got to be a goal that we aspire towards. You know, the National Fair Housing Alliance, which I know you all are familiar with, in its 2013 Trends Report called very vocally for the modernization of the Federal Fair Housing Act to bring it into compliance with the needs of the 21st century. And, you know, while we've made, I think, great strides over the last several decades to be able to set an exemplary example in the area of fair housing, we also know that there's a great deal of work yet to be done. Again, I've been proud to be a champion for building and revitalizing mixed communities throughout the District of Columbia. And that may be the greatest challenge that we have, because there will be increasing pressures on this city as we grow. And if we don't intervene in an aggressive, proactive, intentional way, this city is going to be a place where if you don't make at least $100,000 or more, you won't be able to afford to live here. And is that the kind of city that we want, ladies and gentlemen? Absolutely not. It means that people will have to be looking to live in Ward 9, Ward 10, Ward 11. You all know where those wards are, right? Outside of the District of Columbia. And that's one of the reasons why a conference like this is so important, because as I look at it, yeah, we've made a lot of progress in terms of ensuring fair housing. But I'm not sure that the challenges that we have before us right now aren't more difficult than what we faced when discrimination was even more apparent. And boy, haven't we seen evidence of discrimination in the last few days. It's hard to believe that in 2014 we would have somebody in the position that this gentleman, for want of a better way of putting it, is in, that would you know, spout off some of the kinds of things that have been said. You know, and that's a good reminder for us that even though we are in 2014 and moving towards 2015, there are still people out there who have views and who still engage in the practice of those views that are hugely discriminatory towards others. Does anybody know what this gentleman's field was before he became the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers? What was it? It was housing. That's exactly right. And was sued for that more than once and had huge settlements. It just simply shows that we have a lot of work to do. You're not going to see it necessarily as blatant as we've seen in this situation, where people are faced with unfair challenges based on their income, based on their appearance, or based on their age, or any other category. But it is still there, and it is still, in some instances, so subtle that it gets past us. How many people have heard from some of our folks who are seniors, who are getting older, that they can't find an affordable place to live in the District of Columbia? I hear it all the time. You know, one of the things we've done, in addition to the investment that we're making in affordable housing, to build housing and preserve housing, is I was proud to support a bill that actually was crafted by Councilmember Anita Bonds. And the reason for that is what the bill does, it is directed at seniors. It is directed at people who are 70 years of age or older, people who do not make more than $60,000 a year, and people who may have owned a home, who have owned a home for 20 years or more. And if you meet those criteria, you know what the benefit is? That you don't have to pay property taxes anymore. And I just invested in this budget $8.5 million in order to fund that, so that we have yet another tool available to us to ensure that people in the District of Columbia can continue to live here if they want to be able to live here. But you know what? I don't care how many laws we have, how many programs we have, how many services we have. If we don't have the enforcement in place, there's always going to be somebody out there who is clever enough, who is slick enough to work around the law and find a way not to serve people that we want to keep in the District of Columbia. So I really wanted to come today. I really wanted to be a part of this, because I don't think there's anything that's any more important. Fair housing, is more than just a law on the books. You know, for us, it's the fuel, if you will, that is enabling the District of Columbia to be able to welcome new residents from all over the world. But secondly, and just as importantly, it is also an avenue for us to ensure that no matter how old somebody gets, that they can always say, this is my city, and I intend to live here. And it's a city that has said they're going to find a way for me to be able to live in the District of Columbia. So I want to thank you all for having me today. You don't know how encouraging it is to come into a room to see this many advocates, people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and work their gluteus off to be able to ensure that people who may be discriminated against will have a fighter on their behalf. Thank you all very much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. We know you care deeply about these issues, and we're very pleased that you spent this time with us today. So, are we taking some questions? Yes? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, my name is Deborah Johnson, and I've been a Ward 8 resident for a long time, but I'm Ward 4 resident now, member of Temple Praise, where we have a lot of transition. We have a New Day transition home where the children in the transition home come from DC General and who are emancipated from foster care into the transition home. And I guess I'm making a statement plus a question, and the statement is, I'm glad that you mentioned about the homeless population, because I've been troubled a lot about the population at DC General. Last summer, I ran a summer camp for children who are in transition homes at DC General, and we will be doing again in collaboration with Temple Praise and the Department of Parks and Recs for those same children. Earlier today, there was a lady, who spoke, who did an excellent job, Sarah Pratt, and she talked about discrimination that affected people who were domestic violence victims, and also she talked about people who were also underage and having children and so forth, and they were being evicted. And I really need to, we need to make sure that that is addressed even more thoroughly, because if you check the population at the transition homes and DC General, a lot of women, young women, as you say, who are there because of eviction. And also, many of them there, Mr. Mayor, are there because of mental health issues. And Dr. Margaret Moore, who used to be in charge of corrections, but at UDC now, we had a conversation about that yesterday, that she's going to be working with us this summer. So those issues also, the mental health issues and domestic violence, all those have to be addressed. And I'm sorry to take so long.
It's okay. It's all right. I first of all appreciate your comments, and let me say how much I appreciate what the Temple of Praise does. Bishop Staples is a good friend. As you probably know, I've been there many times, and we'll continue to work with Bishop Staples and the staff at the Temple of Praise because of the work that's being done to try to make sure that people in particular, have a decent place to be able to live. And you're right, there are issues of mental health, there are issues of substance abuse, and for some people, it's also an issue of having been in a doubled-up situation. We have a lot of our families who, the head of household, if you will, may be somebody who is 19 or 20 years old. They've never lived on their own. They've lived in a home, with somebody else, and for whatever reason, it gets to a point where they can't get along anymore. So they got to go, and they wind up having no place to go other than shelter. Now, DC General is no place to raise a child. It is absolutely not. But let me tell you what we got to be able to do, ladies and gentlemen. I'd be the first one to say, I want to close DC General. And I have a history of doing that. That's what was with Forest Haven. I worked for 13 years to get that place closed. And we ultimately did close it, but we needed housing, and we created housing for people to be able to live in the community. In order to be able to replace DC General, because whether we like it or not, there are always going to be families that have a crisis and need some place to go. And it may not be an apartment that they can go to right away. We know that's the case. What I want to see is smaller places, not situations where you wind up with 500 and 600 families in shelter, but let's say we had 10 families or 15 families or something like that. We've got to be able to get to the place where we are a city that demonstrates that kind of compassion. You know how many meetings I've been to where people say, "That's right, Gray. We agree with you, man. You go get them. But just don't put it in my neighborhood, okay?" How many times have we heard that? And so, like, it's whose neighborhood is it supposed to be in? Well, I don't know. That's why where you are, you got to figure that out. Well, no, I don't. I can only figure that out if I can work with people in the District of Columbia, if I can work with the folks like those who are in this room. What we need, and we need almost immediately, Michael, is to identify 3 or 4 places where we would be able to send families that is a humane, dignified place that recognizes that we have very young children in these families at times. I mean, can you imagine a child who's 8 years old, 7 years old, 6 years old, goes to school, and children ask each other, "Where you live?" And the answer is, I live in a shelter. I live at DC General. Can you imagine the blow to that child's self-esteem? Can you imagine the demeaning, degrading experience that child experiences? So what I'm asking you all to do is help us figure out how we not only get people into apartments and move them forward, but the day that a family falls into crisis, where do they go? What can we do to create more dignified places than DC General for a person to go to? And then we've had motels. Motels have been used for years in the District of Columbia, ebbs and flows. So help us, ladies and gentlemen. Help us identify where we can say, we want to help this family, but we want them to go on a temporary basis to a dignified place. Where is that dignified place? What is it, and will you help us create it? Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for coming out, Mr. Mayor. I'm Kevin Valentine Jr., and I have a concern about seniors and senior living. My grandmother lost her job in 2008, and she found herself unable to afford where she's living. She's now where she used to live, rather. She used to live in D.C. Now she lives in King George, Virginia, where things are a lot more affordable. And my question is, what is being done on a city level to help make sure that the people who helped keep the city afloat in the 80s, are being able to live here and afford the city currently? As I see it anyway, people will continue to age, and we don't really have a real sustainable solution to the affordable housing for our seniors. So personally, I've called on her behalf, Office of Aging, senior affordable living housing places all over the city, and I get the same thing over and over again. 2-year plus waiting list. And as I see it currently, we are just waiting for seniors to die off, unfortunately, and move other seniors into their spots. But again, what is being done in the sustainability portion to make sure that we are able to house seniors affordably?
Well, that's part of what I was talking about earlier, and that is the investments that we're making. They will benefit seniors as well as others. The $187 million, which of course sounds like a lot of money, but when you start realizing how much that will buy, you got still a long ways to go. But another $100 million this year. Have you had your budget hearing, Michael?
No.
You have not. When is your budget hearing?
This Friday coming up.
This coming Friday. I would ask you all, it's in Michael's budget, okay? We have $100 million this year for more affordable housing, and that will include seniors. I would ask you all to come down and testify. You know what? You don't even have to have, it would be great if you did, write out your testimony so you can turn it in. But come down and say what you just said about the need for affordable housing and to support the investment that the city is trying to make. $100 million, that'll put us at $287 million. And a part of that is also $8.5 million of that will go into the program that I was talking about before, and that is to be able to eliminate the property tax requirements on people who are 70 years of age and older based on the conditions that I mentioned. It may be, you said your grandmother, right? It may be your grandmother would meet those, I don't know. She might meet those conditions, that she's 70 or over, makes under $60,000 a year, and may have owned a home for 20 years or more in the District of Columbia. Property taxes sometimes is what tips people over the edge. And this is a way of eliminating that need for people in the future. We are doing as much as we can to create more affordable housing. I got into a debate with somebody recently about the HITE Act. You go like, what the hell has the HITE Act got to do with this, right? Well, what the HITE Act has to do with it is that the Congress controls, and when we worked with Congressman Issa, and he was trying to give us some flexibility, so I'm going to give him credit. The HITE Act constrains how high our buildings can go. And what we were trying to do was to say, give us the authority to be able to make those decisions ourselves. Now, why did I raise that? Because if we can go up a few more floors, what does that mean? We can create more housing, right, in the District of Columbia. And we can create more housing that is affordable to people who otherwise might have to go to King George, Virginia, in order to be able to find an affordable place to live. Our city is doing extremely well. We are doing extremely well. And one of the downsides to that, if you will, is that a lot of people want to be here now. And in wanting to be here, they are bidding up the price of housing. Our job is to be able to invest what we're doing, what we're benefiting, back in keeping the price of housing and bring it down as much as we possibly can. But we need the support from you guys in this room and other places to say the investment of $100 million in the Housing Production Trust Fund is a good investment to allow my grandmother, my grandfather, my aunt, uncle, or whoever the case may be, to be able to continue to live in the District of Columbia. I'm going to take 2 more questions. This lady over here and then you in the back, sir.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. How are you this afternoon?
I'm fine. How are you?
That's good. My name is Shalita Gorman. I'm with the D.C. Center for Independent Living. where 90% of the people that we serve are people who are interested in finding and locating accessible and affordable housing. And at this current time, it's a major issue for our organization because all that we're able to provide them with is a housing list that's updated on a monthly basis that lets them know what housing communities are open, who have open waiting lists or a closed waiting list. But at this current time, that isn't enough for them because a lot of them want to age in place. They're older individuals or younger individuals who are 21 and 25 years old who have disabilities and want to live independently. What is it our organization can do to help them in this process so that they can live independently within their community, their home, and not worry about eviction and being put out for those who are aging in place?
Well, a couple of things. One, connect with Derek, who runs our Office of Disability Rights. And I'm very familiar with the Center for Independent Living. I don't know if you still are. It used to be in the 1400 block of Florida Avenue. Yeah. I spent a lot of my career working in the field of disability, and I was around. I feel like I've been around when everything was created. But I was around when the Center for Independent Living was created. It came from the Federal Rehab Act and was created as a result of that all over the nation. And so, one, I think you ought to connect with Derek. Raise your hand, Derek, so she'll know where you are and who you are. And secondly, please come down and help us continue to invest in affordable housing in the District of Columbia. You know, so that we are observant ourselves of, fair housing laws. Affordable housing is not restricted to anything but making sure that it's at certain levels of affordability. It has nothing to do with one's disability or ADA requirements. Those are all obviously observed. Has nothing to do with one's, ethnicity, race. All of those things are important, but they're not in any way a factor in making a decision about creating more affordable units in the city. We now have finished or in the pipeline 5,700 units, and we're on our way to, 12,000 units, Michael? So there's more units coming online, but we know that that is a beginning, and we've got to be able to have the resources to keep investing. We've got to create a culture in this city where people recognize that every year there will be investments in affordable housing without interruption, and that's what we've tried to do the last few years, continuing to support the Housing Production Trust Fund, which I think actually was created when Mayor Williams was mayor in the District of Columbia, and supported by the then Council of the District of Columbia. But unless we make those investments, we'll lose the battle really quite badly. Yes, ma'am.
I live in Ward 8.
Yeah.
And by my house, Commerce Heights, the project, they stopped construction. And it looks like they should continue to repair these homes so some of the people from the shelters can get in those public housing units if they're on the list. Because they stopped construction over a year and a half ago, and people could fill these spaces and they could have a home. And I just wonder why, the people in the shelters, why don't they complete the work?
Well, I think it was an issue of federal funding. You familiar with that? Yeah, I was down there recently, and it is. They were looking pretty good, but nothing has been done in the recent past to be able to get them completed. Is there anything you can say to that?
Well, Mr. Mayor, just the new community effort at Deanwood and Lincoln Heights is something that one of the efforts that we're continuing to do is to look at, particularly in that neighborhood, the idea of the new community effort. There's so much opportunity for increased housing, increased density there with new housing, not just fixing up the existing, but how do we build on the density to increase additional housing? But that's not just housing. We want to make sure that retail is healthy, so it's important for us to look at trying to encourage shops to come in and folks to sell healthy food and healthy products to the folks there. And then the cultural amenities. The mayor hasn't talked about, but he talks about the Stand Theater and the investments that the city is now looking to reinvest in that area. I think it's an idea that right now, because there is literally a freeze on federal funding for capital programs, it may as well be a freeze. The amount of money that they now committed to public housing nationwide is about half of what it was just a couple of years ago. So I think the city is taking an unprecedented and courageous step of stepping into the federal government's commitment around that and doing and then to create additional housing there.
All right, I'm blocking on the name of the development. I know exactly where it is too. It's down there by Fairview Hope School, right? Right across from Fairview Hope School. Can you think of the name of the development? I can't either. What's the name of the development? Can you think about it? Can you think of it? What is it? No, it's not Congress Heights. It's not Congress Heights. It is on Yuma Street, right there by Fairview Hope School. What is it? Highland. It is Highland. That's exactly what it is. Highland. That's exactly right. It's Highland. Anyway, and you're right, and it's because of a discontinuation of federal funds. I think there was stimulus dollars that were used to get that going, and it turned out not to be enough dollars as the stimulus dollars were spent to be able to get it finished. And that's one of the unfortunate casualties of it. So anyway, I certainly agree with you, and we're certainly going to continue, as Michael said, we're going to continue with our investments in new communities, and we're going to continue to invest in creating more affordable housing here in the District of Columbia. So thank you all very much for being a great group. Thank you all very much.